Welcome back to episode 14 of the Between the Lines podcast. And we're here after the NBA finals are concluded. Congrats to the New York Knicks getting it done in 5 games against a lot of people's odds. Shout out UJ, you got the winner right. So your ball knowledge, just climbing up the charts. But we're just pretty much going to break down the finals and wrap up the NBA season, give our thoughts on, how the series went, how things could have been differently, just overall concluding the season, maybe looking into next year and just talking some good old basketball as we enter to the off season here. So just like that game 5 we saw, just pretty much as the case has been with many of these games, we saw the Spurs go up and then they choke a lead, and the Knicks came back. So I guess why don't you start us off, Jay? What were your takeaways from game 5? A lot of ups and downs for the Knicks, but they came through. How was that experience watching that game?
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, I thought going after even that ridiculous comeback by the Knicks in Game 4, right? Obviously, with winning at the end with the OG Anunoby tipping for the 29-point comeback in Game 4. I still thought, even though I was certain the series was done after that and the Spurs were going to lose, but I thought the Spurs would be able to get this one at home and at least extend it to 4 games. Like I would expect them to lose that sixth game when it would have been back in New York. And it looked like that through the beginning of the game. It looked like, especially in the first quarter, the Knicks were barely able to cross. I think they have like roughly like in the teens of like points just after the first quarter. They were struggling to get to like 30 and 40 points by the time halftime was rolling around. And even throughout like almost towards the end of the first half, it still felt like the Spurs were dominating the game and really controlling it. And you could start to see the Knicks were slowly starting to work back in it. Like obviously, no one on the Knicks like entirely had like a great shooting night overall. Just like looking at the box score right now, I have it pulled up, and just I'm gonna go through the shooting numbers specifically for the starters for the Knicks. So Josh Hart, obviously not like one of their like relied upon like sharpshooters and things like that. But in that game 3, the one loss they had, he did have 5 or 6 threes in that game. So he's like known to hit his threes every now and then. He's 4 for 11 from the field. OG Anunoby goes 3 for 11 from the field. Karl Anthony Towns goes 1 for 7 from the field. He has triple the amount of fouls than he does points, right? He ends the game, he fouls out with 6 points. Picks up his fourth foul really early on in the third quarter, right? Like within the first couple minutes of the third quarter, he's forced to sit. So Mike Brown isn't able to play him. He has to play a lot more Mitchell Robinson or Ariel Huck-Porty minutes. I don't think anyone expected to see Huck-Porty minutes in the finals, but here we are. And they were still able to get that done even with him on the bench most of the time. Mikal Bridges shot all right, 5 for 10 from the field, but only 14 points for that. He was only able to, some of his threes he was even missing too, went 3 for 7 from three as well. And then you look at the guy, I'm going to read the bench stats too. So you had Landry Shamet, a guy that was on a heater going into this series and like still played pretty well in the series. Shoots 2 for 7 from the field and only 1 for 4 in his threes. Jose Alvarado, a guy that was big in that game 4 comeback, right? We know he was able to help get the momentum back and put the spark back in the stadium for the Knicks. He goes 0 for 5 from the field. Mitchell Robinson goes 1 for 2. Miles McBride goes 0 for 2, and then Jordan Clarkson's the only other guy to take a shot and goes 1 for 5. So really, outside of Jalen Brunson, who goes 14 of 27, so just a little bit over 50% from the field, he shoots 4 for 7 from three, and ends with 45 points in the night, going 13 of 15 from the line as well. That was a great performance that we saw from him, and really the type of performance that he put the entire team on his back, right? Dropping 45 points, and the Knicks only scored 94 in like the total game, so he dropped roughly like half their points and no one else was contributing significantly around them. The guy that was supposed to be their second best player and the guy that was getting early Finals MVP talk through games 1 and 2 wasn't able to get even cross double digit points, right? And he had foul trouble obviously with Cat. Another guy that was like getting a lot of Finals MVP talk, especially after Game 4 with the game winning play, OG Anunoby. He wasn't able to play that well too. Obviously, he was still great on defense, like he's been throughout the series, but his scoring wasn't something that could be found in this game. So overall, my first initial takeaway is, and I'll toss it back to you now, was just that Jalen Brunson played a masterful game. And even though at the beginning of the game, the Spurs were really like hounding him on defense and things like that, making it hard for them just to bring the ball up the court. They were having Steph Castle pressure him right as he crossed the half court line, right, and they were switching everything and having all their guards just be up in his space and not giving him anywhere to go and not giving him anywhere to dribble. And then his role players weren't hitting shots like they usually were, but he was still able, and like great players do, he was still able to find a way around that, push through that, and still able to get the win at the end of the day. So I liked what I saw from him, and like a generational type performance from a small guard who we usually don't see those types of players make these types of plays and have these types of games. So a great performance from Jalen Brunson to win the Knicks their first title since 1973.
Yeah, he brought one back home to the biggest city in the country, and we've seen the crazy celebration stuff going on there. Hope everyone's safe, but pretty crazy performance, like you said, 45 of the 94 team points, and kind of like reminiscent of like a Michael Jordan type performance we saw in like game six of the 98 finals where MJ dropped to 45 to beat the Jazz, close out that series. So Jalen Brunson, similar kind of takeover. No one on his team was really doing him a lot of favors. Obviously, it was like an overall low scoring game. So scoring output isn't the best way to look at it, but still, like you said, OG went 3 for 11. Other guys struggled. Cat was like in foul trouble all game. Never thought we'd see like Ariel hook 40 minutes in like a closeout game in the NBA finals, but stuff happens. And so you kind of touched on like a lot of the Knicks side of things. And now going to the Spurs, where I mean, what a disaster class for a lot of guys on the team, but especially their starting backcourt of like Steph Castle and De'Aaron Fox going combined 4 for 25 from the field, not on like anyone's prediction and not on anyone's radar that happening. I mean, Fox has had a down series for sure, but Steph Castle, like his first points came on his putback dunk in like the late game situation. I mean, what a way to get your first field goal made, but at the same time, like he was 0 for 9 going into that. So really rough performance for both of those guys. And I mean, the biggest question now going into the offseason is what do you do with De'Aaron Fox? He's going to be entering next year, getting paid over 60 mil, and that 4 year, 230 million extension kicks in. I saw a graphic like the only guys that are going to be making more than him annually next year are going to be Shea, Jason Tatum, and Devin Booker. So I mean, there's definitely like a gap in those names in De'Aaron Fox. Do you move him like in like a salary dump type of move to even if you like lose the trade and get some new bench pieces, especially with like the rise of Dylan Harper dropping 21 points, playing probably put up the best performance out of anyone on the Spurs that night. There's like a graphic I saw kind of like touching on both how little help Jalen Brunson had and how well Dylan Harper was doing. There was like a point in either the late third quarter, early fourth quarter where the Knicks had 0 bench points and the Spurs had 25 bench points. And of those 25, 21 from Dylan Harper. So Harper played well. Obviously, in the late game situation, he missed the big free throw. He took that fast break layup in maybe a bit too early, kind of forced it. So some questionable decision making, but he's a rookie. He's only going to get better. And he's really not the one to blame. Like, yeah, he had those mistakes in the end, but blame De'Aaron Fox, blame Steph Castle, even blame Wemby, who, I mean, to me, the biggest thing with Wemby at this point is we kind of talked about it with our elite analysis from Carl in the last episode, where Wemby, he's 7'5", but he doesn't play like he's 7'5". We need to see him kind of just be that physical big, live in the paint, just like use your physicality and height that no one else can combat. The Knicks, like, yeah, they have Mitchell Robinson, Karl Anthony Towns, but like none of those guys can compete with Wemby if he's in the paint. But instead, we saw Wemby shoot 9 for 33 from three across the entire series. Pretty poor performance. Like, why is he even taking like almost 6 threes a game for someone who's 7'5"? I mean, I know that's what makes him unique, especially coming into the league. He's like a guard, but he's 7'5". But at some point, and this probably also falls back on Mitch Johnson's coaching, like you got to scheme up something better if you're a unicorn of a player. So I mean, I don't know. Overall, I'm not going to discredit the Knicks at all. They 1-5. People say, oh, like Mickey Mouse ring, no injured Tatum, injured Embiid, but rings a ring. I don't think they're really, especially out of all the rings in recent history, this one probably has the least amount of question marks, if you want to be honest here. Uh, and yeah, the Knicks proved pretty much the world wrong, got their first win in 50 plus years. So shout out to them.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with the Spurs and just how they sort of, you mentioned it at the first, like a disaster class from them, just how to lose a series. Like, I'm going to read off, you have some of the stats of the leads too that you can read off after, but like just the win probabilities, their peak win probabilities in each of their four losses. In game one, they had a 91.6% chance to win that game. They were up most of that game and they choked that game away at the end. Game two, still not as crazy because that game was a little bit more highly competitive. That was 72.8% chance. So like still almost a 75%, 3 and 4 chance you're going to win the game. Game four, obviously we know they had that 29-point lead, so peak win probability of 99.6%. And then in game five, a 95.4% chance yesterday, and still able to not lose that game. So they first of all, their whole team has to learn how to shoot a little bit more. It has to shoot better from the line, from free throws. Mitch Johnson has to get these boys in the gym over the offseason and making sure they're shooting their free throws. I don't know if they offer that at the Monk training session that Wemby's going to be going to, but he's got to work on the free throws there. Dylan Harper, like you mentioned, I don't want to put too much blame on him because I think he should have been playing a little bit more minutes. That's obviously not a unique take. I think everyone was saying that too. He needed to play a few more minutes towards the end of that game. And especially with how bad Fox and Castle were playing. I think it's all right. They were mentioning this on the broadcast. I think it was specifically Richard Jefferson that mentioned this. It's all right to have De'Aaron Fox bring the ball up the floor because he's still a talented ball handler, and it's mostly that his shot wasn't falling, not necessarily anything with his ball handling or anything like that, other than like a few mistakes, maybe like a bad pass or things like that. But the biggest issue with him this series was the shot. So I think it's still okay to have him bring the ball and maybe beat the initial defender and start the action. But you have to have a guy like Dylan Harper finishing the rest of the action. So either like feeding it to Wemby for some type of play, or getting it to him the other side of the court and letting him work there on a specific matchup, or if he gets a certain advantage. So I think that's one thing they should have done a little bit better is just know that you have a certain advantage in a guy, even though he's not your starter, and you want to roll with a guy that you've been paying a lot of money. Obviously, that's probably part not necessarily something that Mitch Johnson's thinking about in the moment, but that is a guy that you paid a hefty price for to be able to get on your team in a trade, and you're going to be paying quite the hefty price to have him on your team for the next couple of years. So that's a hard pill to swallow, obviously, but you're it's the finals. You're doing whatever it takes, and you don't care about anyone's feelings in the moment. So I think Harper should have had a little bit more, had his hands on the controls a little bit more, and just let him work the action and see if he can get Wemby involved in there as well. And just one more thing with like talking about like Steph Castle too, like and all these guys, their guards, while all their guards are really athletic, right? Obviously Steph Castle probably being the most athletic one. Dylan Harper's still very athletic too. We saw him get to the rim multiple times and do a lot of like crazy dunks and things like that, and like tough finishes over like really good rim protectors in these all these series overall. And then finally De'Aaron Fox too. He's a really athletic guy, but more in terms of the speed, more than like the power and force game and things like that. But they all are really athletic guards, which is like their main like trait. This is that's what helps them create their advantages. But all those advantages can only be utilized and acted upon if you're able to like pair that with really good shooting, right? And even talking about some of their wings and stuff like that, like a guy like Carter Bryant, he's obviously a really athletic player too. And specifically, his athletic traits manifest more on the defensive end, but also got to work on his shooting. So it's like a lot of their young players, while they do have the thing that's hardest to teach, which is athleticism. They have all that stuff with them. It's just hard to be able to have that stuff be shown in its most fruitful way if you're not applying that with great shooting and things like that. So I just think they need to work on the shooting overall as a team. Like Wemby missed some free throws too. So it's just overall they do have they've drafted really well in terms of the traits of the players they have and still the mental traits too. Like I think these are the type of guys that are gonna want to work on shooting and things like that, working on their craft. So I think they have that part locked up well. It's just I think they're going to need to make some incremental improvements, and who knows, they could even be winning the chip next year if they make just a few slight improvements.
Yeah, like kind of perfectly transitioning there. I think they need to find a way to play a more like complementary brand of basketball where they have all these like defensive studs where I don't think anyone really questioned any of the Spurs defensive outputs in this entire series. It was more just like the offensive inconsistency. So whether that's like, developing new skill sets over the offseason, bringing some new guys in, they got to find a way to. I mean, we're in like the 3-point shooting era of the league, and the Spurs are one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the playoffs. You can't really win rings with that kind of output. So we need some like we've hyped out like OKC having these like 3 and D guys. So Spurs have like the defense part. They got to get the shooting part specifically from beyond the arc.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with the shooting, everything like that. And another thing that one of their best players in their team, Wemby, needs to improve on. You mentioned it. He's got to be able to find his way to force himself in the paint a little bit more. And obviously, as much as we would love for him to be a player like Shaq and things like that, and just have like we saw that in the game one of the Western Conference Finals, that 41 point 22 rebound game that he had. Obviously, we'd love to see for him to have a lot of 40-20 games, 30-10 games in like the playoffs and things like that, and use his overall size. But obviously, he doesn't have the build of Shaq and some of the centers that we've seen in the 90s and 2000s. So it might be hard for him to do that. Even if he is able to bulk up, we've seen him put on some weight and specifically like functional strength and like get stronger. And he's been more defined in his first 3 years in the league. But one of the issues with that is he's not going to be able to fully become like that because obviously being such a tall player, like his high center of gravity and things like that, which makes it a lot easier for him to step out and hit shots and things like that. But we still want to be able to see him use some of that more, like the paint work and things like that. We saw him working with Hakeem Olajuwon, right? I think it was last offseason or 2 off seasons ago. It doesn't look like he applied much of what he learned. Like obviously we've seen him like become better in the post than he was in his rookie year. But I want to see him apply even more of that. Like a simple thing is like every time he's catching the ball in the paint, I've noticed that every time he does that, right? Obviously, your back's to the basket. It's a little bit hard to like see, like, or like verbalize it. What I'm trying to say, but when he has his back to the basket and he's in the paint, he always takes whatever the foot that's like on the baseline side, and he's always spinning it around. So he's like backing up and getting closer to the 3-point line. If he's just able to take his other foot and swing it around, so he can still face up to the basket, but if he just swings it around and gets a little bit more space, then he's just able to like, get a more direct path to the basket. He's every time even he posts up and he just wants a face up jumper, he's setting himself a little bit further from the basket every time he does that. So just a simple thing like that. Can you get yourself a little bit closer to the basket? That way it'll push you to be able to get to the basket more. The defender is naturally going to back off and give you a little bit of space. Can you take advantage of that space and then go in? So just some simple things like that. Could he just add one or two things, 2 to 3 plays in each game where he's going through the post and like going to the rim directly, right? Instead of trying to like be a more finesse player and like be like one of his favorite players, KD, and use a lot of that outside jump shot. Can he go a little bit more in? Obviously, we know he's going to get the lobs and the rolls and things like that. It's hard to miss that, right, at his height. And he's doing that really well, and his teammates are helping him get to that level a lot better too. But it's just something you want to see from him, adding that dimension to his game, adding that post dimension to his game.
Yeah, I mean, like kind of like you said, the unique part of his game is like he plays like a guard, but at the same time, I think it really wouldn't hurt to like develop somewhat of like a post bag. I think getting in the gym with a guy like Dirk Nowitzki as well. You mentioned Hakeem in the past, where even like a lot of these current day bigs like Joel Embiid, Bam Adebayo, Domantas Sabonis when he's healthy, they're really good like post playmaking bigs. So I mean, if we could see Wemby also develop a bit of like a playmaking aspect from the post, that would be good too, instead of like just forcing these like contested shots that he's been doing instead of either putting his back to the basket, getting into the paint, or like kicking it out to an open guy. So let's see what Wemby does in the offseason. And speaking of the offseason, going into next year, I saw that the now favorites to win next year's championship, all was way too early predictions, but the official predictions out there have the Spurs and the Thunder tied as the favorite to win next year. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think maybe it's a bit of like glaze, recency bias, or do you think it's justified for those two being the favorites?
I think honestly that's fair that the most of the sports books and the prediction markets and all that they have the Spurs and Thunder as co-favorites. As much as we talked about in the Western Conference the last few years, we think it's a much stronger conference. We have seen the East win the NBA title a couple of years, or like 2 of the last 3 years have been an Eastern Conference team. Um, so it's not that I can't see an Eastern Conference team winning at all. I just think from what we've seen from the Thunder in these last 3 years, like really mostly the last 2 years, we've seen them sort of rise to this potential of having a dynasty. Obviously, they're going to have a lot of cap issues this summer. There's no way going around that. They're going to have to cut a lot of players. And players, obviously, some Thunder fans might be saying, yeah, we want this player cut anyways. But just after one bad postseason, but they've played pivotal roles for you in the past couple of years. So is that really someone you're going to want to be cutting and having an unknown like in that role instead if you have to draft a player and things like that? And obviously with the Spurs, we've seen this postseason. They didn't win the championship, obviously, but we know that they have a generational player leading their team. We know they have a really good guard core. We know they have a really good wing core, right? And obviously the big is obviously taken care of with Wemby and even good backup minutes from a guy like Luke Cornett. So all that stuff is definitely taken care of for them in terms of the roster building aspect of it. And now all that's left is just are these guys going to get better? And I think we've seen from all of their mentalities and just the way they are and the type of emotional leader they have on their team in Victor Wembanyama and still like a guy like Greg Popovich is still around the organization, things like that can still help motivate them, things like that. I expect them to get better too. So I expect these two teams are going to be running the Western Conference for the next few years, right? Obviously, I think the Thunder are more volatile, and I would definitely, if I had to pick one of these two teams that wasn't going to be top of the conference in maybe like 4 to 5 years, I think it would easily be the Thunder. Mostly because as young as both these teams are, the Thunder are just a little bit older, so some of those guys might get a little bit out of their primes a little bit sooner than the Spurs will. So in terms of just both of these teams overall, I definitely could see them. I definitely can see them being the top two favorites next year. And I don't think it's ridiculous to say that like an Eastern Conference team is still going to have a harder time of just getting out of the East overall because I think the East is going to be better next year. We're going to see a team like Boston that's going to have a full healthy year of Jason Tatum, right? They're going to obviously try and figure out if they can fix their center rotation, right? Like they had to roll with Neemias Queta for most of the year. Can you improve on that potentially in the draft or free agency or via a trade? We know they've been linked to a lot of Giannis rumors. That would definitely help your forward and like front court rotation. The Pacers are going to be back next year, regardless of how much better they're going to be. They were still able to make the finals last 2 years ago, and then or last year, and then it was still able to make the Eastern Conference Finals 2 years before that. So or a year before that. So there is still a team that's going to be a prominent contender in the East to potentially get to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Knicks obviously just winning the finals. I'm sure they're going to be back. The Cavaliers, right there, it's a little bit uncertain in what they're going to do in terms of their moves for their team, but I think they're still going to be able to make it back too. And then we have plenty of younger teams that are getting a lot of talent and youth infused into their team. Is that going to help them? So overall, all that is just to say, like I do agree. I think the Spurs and the Thunder should be like the favorites or the co-favorites for like next year. And I don't think it's that ridiculous to have them up there, and I don't think it's that ridiculous to have a lot of these like Western Conference teams up there again because I still think they're the better conference, and definitely I think the Thunder and Spurs are like the cream of the crop, so to speak. So what do you think about those two being the favorites?
Yeah, I mean, like solely for contending, I think that the West has like the two biggest contenders for next year. In general, I feel like the West is, I think the East has gotten better over the years, but the West to me is still a much more top heavy conference, whereas in the East we see a lot of parity. Kind of like touching on the Celtics, we saw like the Bill Simmons report where the Celtics made like an official offer for Giannis and a move could happen. Who knows? Maybe you got to get off of like Jalen Brown or something, but you can see if they make a contending move, like a win now move for Giannis. Like you said, the Cavs, they have a lot of questions to answer, but they made it to the conference finals. Could the Pistons, could they get like a guy like KD to help with their offensive struggles? Are the Pacers healthy with Halliburton next year? The Sixers, young and up and coming, won in the first round. The Knicks, obviously defending champions. Can they make a run back? So East just has like too many moving parts for me to see any of them being a high contender because it's a bit more of an evenly split conference in my eyes. Where in the West, I think we're going to see, barring some like Cinderella stories or some injuries, we're going to see a Spurs OKC conference finals for, I'm not going to say like the next like 5+ years, but definitely probably the next year or two, I'd say. The Spurs, I think, this is kind of like Wemby's like 2007 LeBron finals moment. Both are 22, both. LeBron got swept. Wemby lost in five gentlemen sweep against the other team. And, there's a lot to learn from these moments, a lot of maturity that you develop. Wemby already seems like he has like the mindset of like a guy who really wants to be great in this league. So to me, like, of course, you don't want to lose, you always want to win, but this loss isn't the worst thing in the world for such a young team in my eyes. They're gonna they've already been here once, and now they have that experience under their belt of like a deep playoff run. And then OKC, to me, they're still that team. They'll have the back to back going MVP going into next year. They'll have some guys healthy like J Dub, Chet, AJ Mitchell, other guys that were struggling with injuries, some struggling with just like playing good basketball in general. But do they make a move? Do they make a move for Giannis? Do they make a move for someone else? Do they get some depth? How does Jared McCain do with like a full offseason with the team, building chemistry? A lot of questions to be answered there, but I think that these two are the clear contenders. And I think it's honestly right that they're both tied. I think either one of them could make a run, and it's too early to say one of them is heavily favored over the other. But it's going to be
Yeah,
interesting next year for sure.
yeah, and I think one thing you mentioned with how we were both talking about how we think we could see the Spurs and OKC sort of having this rivalry, so to speak, like for domination at the top of the Western Conference, like who's gonna be able to hold the throne for longer. I would say like we talk about some of the historical comps for big men that have played in the NBA in their first finals, right? I think like probably the one that like a lot of people are going to right now is how Shaq played in his first finals, right? In '95, his Orlando Magic matchup with the Rockets, right, in the 1995 NBA Finals, and we see they get swept in that series, right? It's a four-game sweep. Obviously, who knows what would have been different? Nick Anderson misses those four free throws, back to back free throws, in the first game, right? So that obviously could have affected how they played in the rest of the series. Um, but obviously, no one in that moment probably thought, okay, there's no way Shaquille O'Neal can ever become like a great player. But people were saying, yeah, he probably has to work on this game after that because he got outplayed and out physical and everything by a player that was at the top of his game. And similar to that, no one's saying that in the comparison's sake that like Karl Anthony Towns is the equivalent to Hakeem Olajuwon in the overall grand scheme of things. But Wemby did get outplayed in some of the games by a more veteran big man, right? And he got outplayed by a more veteran team in the New York Knicks, by a more veteran best player in Jalen Brunson. So things like that are going to force him to have to work on his game. And I think we could see another similar historical comp for I think what we might see if the Spurs are able to improve a little bit, which I think we all think they will. The OKC, are they going to improve a little bit? I think we could see something similar to what we've had in the late 90s and going into mostly the early 2000s in a Western Conference rivalry that's going to be similar to what we had with the Lakers and the Spurs, right? So if we start, I pulled up the year by year series of like how the Lakers did in every season. So if we talk about the first year that we had in the first year of the Spurs and Lakers matching up at the playoffs when they had Kobe Bryant, when the Lakers had Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, and this was the first season where the Spurs had second season where the Spurs had David Robinson and Tim Duncan on their team, right? So one a little bit of an older star, one younger star coming into their game, and a potential rivalry starting from that year. So in the '99 playoffs, the Lakers get swept by the Spurs, right? Similar to how we've seen like Wemby get outplayed in his finals and things like that. Like the younger team wasn't able to win that, right? And then the next year, the Lakers are able to avoid the Spurs and still make the finals and everything like that and win against the Pacers. And then in 2001, they meet up again in the conference finals. And this time the Lakers are able to sweep the Spurs, right? So that's a 4-0 sweep for them. And then the next year, they meet up again in the conference semifinals. The Lakers are able to win that. 2003, the Spurs are able to win that in the conference semifinals, win 4-2. 2004, they match up again in the conference semifinals, and the Lakers are able to win 4-2. So I think we might be on track for something similar like that. I think the next few years, the Western Conference representative is going to be one of these two teams for most of the year. Obviously, we've talked about so many of the recent teams that have won in this era of parity. The second they win, it's like, how are they going to start a dynasty? I think it's probably good this year. No one has really started that with the Knicks. I think it's probably taken us 8 years. We finally learned that we're a little bit more of an era of parity. I don't think it's going to win like that. But in terms of the Western Conference, just in terms of the conference champion there, I could see a little bit of we don't have as much parity as we've had in the last couple of years in the Western Conference. I don't think we'll see too many repeat champions or I don't think we'll see too many new champions from the Western Conference. I think it's going to be a lot of Spurs and a lot of Thunder, maybe a couple teams, the Lakers with Luka and everything, they get back together. Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves, some of the other teams that are up and coming, could they do something like that? But just a historical like comp for what I think we're seeing now, I think we're going to see something similar like that um, in the future with this like Spurs and OKC rivalry that's just starting.
Yeah, kind of. That's I haven't really thought about it. That's a good, interesting parallel because also looking at like the teams from that like early 2000s Lakers Spurs rivalry to now, the OKC and Spurs. Like the Spurs both have like that, that young big man. Obviously, you had like David Robinson, and then you had the up and coming of Tim Duncan. Now you have it in Wemby. And then even the Lakers, you had like Kobe, who at that time, I mean, Shaq was the more premier player for sure. But I've seen a lot of like comparisons drawn between like Kobe Bryant and like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander's in terms of their play styles, like the mid range domination, just like the physicality in general. So kind of like an interesting parallel there for that. Another dimension for that parallel there between the like late 90s, early 2000s rivalry to now. So I don't know. I think the West is to me like the Nuggets, their championship window is kind of, I wouldn't say it's entirely closed, but it's probably more closed than it is open. Other teams like you said, the Lakers, the Wolves, they probably need a bit more of like a Cinderella story, like a deeper run, unless they make some major moves in the offseason. So I truly do think it's going to be like one conference of full parity in the East and the one conference of just like late 90s basketball where we have just like teams making it back and forth or the same teams like year after year.
Yeah. So I think the Spurs. I think we both agree that the Spurs are going to be back here for sure. This is definitely not going to be some type of thing where there's one-time Western Conference champion when we see him again. I'm sure they're going to be back here. They're potentially going to be back here next year, right? We mentioned that they're favorites, co-favorites for the NBA Finals. But I think that's enough time spent talking to a loser. I think we should talk a little bit, go back a little bit, talk more about the Knicks, obviously the winners of the NBA Finals. So I think the first thing I want to ask is just let's just have a conversation about who we think was most important for the Knicks. So I think during this entire playoff run, I think we can both agree that Jalen Brunson was definitely the most important player for the Knicks during the playoff run. But I think it honestly gets interesting if you try and like rank maybe who the second or third best players, or even like if you want to go like front office or like coaching staff or things like that. So who would you say was the, instead of saying player, I'll put it like this: who do you think was the second most important figure for the Knicks during this playoff run, the entirety of the playoff run, starting with the Hawks series over the two sweeps and into this gentleman sweep? Who do you think was the second most important figure for the Knicks?
I think I'm going to keep it on the player side here. I'm just going to say Cat. I mean, he is obviously like the number two option, but we just saw him completely like change his play style this entire playoffs where, he was kind of, we saw like the Knicks kind of had a bit of a scare going down 2-1 in that Hawks playoff series. And they kind of turned to Cat to like be that playmaker that he never really has been throughout his career. Really, he's always been like, stretch 5, 4 for some years of his career, like the bigger guy that really isn't like paint dominant, but still has somewhat of a post presence, good post game. But he's never been like a playmaker up until this year, where we saw him have like the 2010 and 10 closeout triple double in that series, where he's just been playmaking. Jalen Brunson, when he gets doubled, who do they turn to? Not another guard, but like their big man and Cat. So I think the way that he was able to adapt his play style in such a short time frame, completely like modernized and like rejuvenated his game in such a quick turnaround, was really impressive. And like, yeah, he didn't really have the hottest ending to the series against the Spurs, but games 1 through 4, 1 through 3, he was really looking like it could have been like him as the finals MVP, honestly. He was playing some really good basketball, kind of shocking the world in how he was like matching up with Wemby. So I think Cat is going to be my answer, just because A, the fact that he completely changed his play style and became a bit of a playmaking big, and B, just like him living up to the hype of like going against, he had like people say like a Mickey Mouse Eastern Conference Finals run where he didn't face any like scary bigs. Like he faced like Onyeka Okongwu in round one. And in round two, he faced like Embiid when he did play, which was barely. And then against the Cavs, like, yeah, you had Evan Mobley, but he's no Wemby. So he was able to live up to the challenge and take on Wemby. And then another guy I think who I have to say is pretty vital would be Landry Shamet. I'd say the fact that the Knicks, they have depth, but I would say like they haven't really, it's been weird. Like they've had ups and downs in terms of their like bench contributions where like Jose Alvarado, he's good for like handling the ball, but except for like that one game in the finals, he didn't really have a lot of outbursts from scoring. Like Deuce McBride, as much as the fans love him, they yell Deuce every time he shoots it. It's more often a brick than a make when they yell Deuce. I mean, Mitchell Robinson does what he does. Airhook Porty barely plays. They didn't really have a lot of key bench contribution, even though they have guys that can rise to the occasion. But we saw Landry Shamet, especially in that conference finals, like turn into a demon off the bench. He went 12 for 13 or like 11 for 12 from three off the bench. And in general, he shot a very high 3-point percentage across the entire postseason for the Knicks. So I think in the non-Brunson minutes, which has always been probably every Knicks fan's nightmare, where when Brunson's off the court, things kind of go left. We see guys like Josh Hart like handling the ball and chucking up threes in the last game. You don't ever see that. So Landry Shamet gave them a bit of stability in those non-Brunson minutes. So overall, I think Cat and Landry Shamet, even though they didn't win their conference finals MVP or the finals MVP, got to tip the hat to them for being key contributors in this run.
Yeah, those are definitely good picks. Specifically Andrew Shamet, that's a guy that I don't think anyone expected to be contributing in that big of a role once the season started, and look at the role he ended up playing in the finals and in the playoffs overall. For the first figure, I think it was probably the player that I think was most important for the Knicks outside of Brunson, obviously. I'm gonna go with OG Anunoby. I think part of what makes Anunoby so important and what made him so vital during this playoff run was not only because he obviously played out of his mind in terms of his shooting splits and things like that. I'm gonna read off some of his like shooting performances that he had during the playoffs, but also that he's mostly tasked with guarding the got best offensive perimeter player or the best offensive creator on the other team during most of the during almost every single game of the playoffs, right? So obviously in a team in a when you have a team constructed like the Knicks do with a weak defensive guard and a weak defensive big, it puts a lot of stress on your wings to be able to play in that sort of defensive role. So he was able to do that really well, and that's the reason they were able to have that 13-game win streak in the middle of the playoffs. And he was a big reason as to why they were able to win the championship overall. And then just to go in terms of his offense, because we always know his defense has been there. That's part of why the Knicks made the Knicks. Where I forget if it was a trade or they signed him initially. But part of why they did that was mostly because of his defensive effort and his defensive quantities were a known quantity. Like his defensive abilities was a known quantity, but it was to be a little bit uncertain would he be able to have great type of shooting performances and have teams still be able to guard him and things like that and have him be a threat from the outside. So starting in the Hawks series, these were his respective 3-point shooting percentages in that series. He starts 67%, 50%, 50%, 50%, 67%, 67%, shooting above 50% in all of the games in the first round series, right? And in the second series against the Hawks, right, or second series against the Sixers, he missed 2 games, so it was only 2 games there. So I'll leave that one out. And even the one against the Cavs, he has 2 games where he's all right from three, but then he has one game where he's 50% and 75% from there. And then going in the final series, he starts with a 50%, 40%, 42.9%, 77.8%, and this last game 20%, but no one was shooting great in that series. So overall, he's shooting definitely more than the majority of games. He's shooting above what's deemed like a great number for 3-point shooting, 40%. He's shooting above 50%, and most of them are right at 50%. So he played great in terms of the offensive end, and he allowed for them to be able to just move off of being so Brunson centric. They were able to rely on Brunson during the clutch of any of the games where they needed because he was a little bit rested up from how much OG Anunoby and the other guys too, Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart to a certain extent, Karl-Anthony Towns, but they were able to rely on Brunson in the clutch because of how much he was able to take the load off his plate and have OG Anunoby do a lot of those minutes or do a lot of those ball handling minutes in the important times during the longer stretches of games. So I think OG Anunoby, he played a vital role. Obviously, the guys you mentioned too, but I think OG Anunoby, due to how he played in terms of his offensive ability and what he added to his game, or what it looks like he added to his game during the playoffs, came through in a big way, and I think that made him the second most important player there. So the last thing I think I want to touch on for the Knicks before we actually do a little bit of a NBA game draft type thing was I want to ask you. Obviously, it's very early to be looking into this for next season. Not only are we looking to the regular season next year, we're looking to the playoffs of next year. So I want to know, obviously the Knicks are going to be coming back with running back almost this whole team, but like we mentioned before, a lot of teams in the East are going to be getting better or healthier, right? A lot of returning players, a lot of new players that are going to be joining the East. So I want to ask you, who do you think is going to give the Knicks the most trouble next year? Who do you think is going to be the biggest obstacle for the Knicks to have a repeat championship or have a repeat Eastern Conference championship?
Yeah, I mean, it's never too early to look next year. So let me think of a few teams here. I think like the one obvious immediate answer is like the Boston Celtics with their experience and everything, making 2 finals in the last 5 years, winning one of them. They just like they live in the conference finals, it seems like. So if they get a full year of like healthy Jalen Brown, healthy Jason Tatum with Jalen Brown, can they make some moves to like figure out their front court presence, whether it's bringing in a superstar like Giannis or even getting some other guys that can just help establish a brand of physicality in the front court and like a paint presence? I think the Celtics could pose a threat. Outside of them, though, I think the Detroit Pistons could be an interesting case where we saw their rise this year to the one seed, but obviously they came short in the playoffs. Two 7 game series in a row, losing the second one to the Cavs in the second round. I think the Pistons, they swept the season series against the Knicks. They went 3-0 against them, but even that aside, I think the Pistons pose like a daunting physicality test that really no other team has really posed in the East for a while. So if the Pistons can find some like options on offense, whether it's bringing in a guy like Kevin Durant, I've seen like Donovan Mitchell linked to the Pistons, kind of getting another ball handler to take some pressure off of Cade. I think that would be scary for the Knicks to face because then you'd have not only like probably the top ranked defense in the league to go against, but also just like a potent offensive challenge as well. And then kind of like, I mean, this one might be the biggest long shot because it was definitely the biggest Cinderella story for any team to make the finals probably in this entire last 5 to 6 years. But I think if the Indiana Pacers, if Halliburton is like back to his old self 100%, if no one else loses a step, we saw Siakam, even though he's probably one of the only bright spots on the Pacers this year, making like getting like an all-star nod, where meanwhile the team was like 13th, 14th seed. So they have Siakam, they have other young guys that are developing. They obviously made the now catastrophic trade for Zubac where they lost a top 5 pick, but Zubac kind of giving them like the answer to their front court problem that they had for the entirety of the last year. Where I think the Pacers, if they're healthy, could be a scary team as well because no one's really figured out how to like handle this extremely fast, like almost like AAU type of basketball play style where they just like run up the court. Doesn't matter who's bringing it up, get it to Halliburton, like someone rebound, get it to Hallie. He's gonna get his open man no matter what, no matter who's on him. Just like it's almost like black magic as we saw in like their last year finals run. So maybe a bit of a long shot, but if the Pacers are healthy, I think they're scary. We saw them already beat the Knicks in the conference finals, so definitely could happen again. But I'd say the Celtics and Pistons are probably the biggest threats in my eyes, and then the Pacers if a few things work in their favor.
Yeah, that makes sense. For the team, I think is going to be the biggest threat, and in terms of like a not too far of a long shot, like I think a team that most of us expect to be there. I'm going to take the Pistons too. I think we, like you mentioned, we saw the Pistons match up with them really well during the regular season. We saw them win. I think it was 2 out of their 3, or maybe 3 out of their 4. In regular season matchups, the Pistons were able to win, and specifically, we saw them dominate in a lot of those matchups. We saw it was complete blowouts that favor the Pistons. Cade Cunningham played really well in those games. So I think the Pistons had a certain formula, and I think we all expected to have a really good Eastern Conference Finals series if the Pistons had beaten the Cavs, and I think we would have gotten a great matchup there and would have tested the Knicks potentially even more than the Spurs tested them in this finals. But I think that's definitely going to be one of the teams that I'm looking forward to in the East next year. That's going to have be a really big obstacle for the Knicks. My team that I want to give as sort of a long shot, and a team that could they potentially present some problems for the Knicks if they were to advance that far in the playoffs? This is not a team not a team that either of us picked to win a single playoff series at all this year. Not a team that any of us expected to even make the playoffs as it got towards the end of the year, but they barely squeaked in. I'm going to say the Orlando Magic. Mostly that is because of their roster construction and the new head coach, right? So obviously, the Magic get a new head coach, Sean Sweeney from the San Antonio Spurs is going to be coming over. He was the defensive coordinator for the Spurs and one of the defensive masterminds for them. Obviously, having a defense is easy to become a mastermind of when you have Victor Wembanyama there, but he's still been really talented and he was able to put the guards in a lot of good positions and things like that. And specifically, I think part of why I think the Magic could be a good matchup for them is just because of the defensive prowess that most of their starters possess, right? So you have a guy starting the guard position like Jalen Suggs. I have the depth chart pulled up right here because I don't want to forget anyone. Jalen Suggs and Desmond Bane are your guard positions. Jalen Suggs is mostly known for being a great defender, right? He's obviously upped his offensive game a little bit recently, but he's known for being a good defender. Desmond Bane, a little bit on the other side, he's known for being a great sharpshooter, but he's not a person that's a scrub on defense. He's not a guy that's a cone that you can plan to attack on the defensive end. He's someone that can also guard up really well. He came from that Grizzlies culture where he was one of the players that would make it really tough and he made them a good defense at times. And then your 2 forward spots, you have guys Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero. Obviously, those 2 guys aren't really going to be tasked with guarding a guy like Jalen Brunson most of the time, but can they limit a guy like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby from having the type of nights we saw them have during the playoffs this year, which helped take the load off of Jalen Brunson to have him keep him more fresh? And then at their center position, Wendell Carter Jr. Obviously, Cat's a guy that's not ridiculously tall or anything like that, so you don't need a 7+ footer to match up with him or things like that. Wendell Carter's a little bit on the shorter side for a center too. I don't think he's 7 foot. If I have that correctly, I'll check it. Um, but he's a guy that's also really strong too. He can sort of match physicality and match the force that Cat plays with, and he's starting to play with a lot more now. So it's a little bit of a long shot one, and obviously they had so many problems this year just in terms of like the culture and things like that. It really seemed like their star player didn't even like their head coach, so obviously that's why they moved off him. I still think Paulo Banchero can be a good player. Obviously, he really needs to work on the shooting and his efficiency overall. But that's a team I think could be a long shot for a potential upset of the Knicks next year, or giving them some potential trouble in a playoff series.
Yeah, I mean, with Jamal Mosley at the picture, I think anything's possible for that Magic team. Pretty talented roster, really good personnel, and he really held them back from like the previous year. They had a 7 game thriller against the Cavs to now blowing a 3-1 lead. Like, it doesn't really get any worse than that. So I kind of like that pick. It's a bit of like kind of like an underdog pick there. No one really expecting it, but I could definitely see that working out if
Yeah.
Coach Sweeney and the guys get it together for sure.
All right, so now we're gonna play a quick game just to end off this episode. So obviously we're sort of wrapping up the NBA season, and specifically the NBA playoffs in this episode. So we wanted to talk about just our favorite games overall in this playoffs. So we're gonna do a draft of our top 5 favorite games in the playoffs. Tish is gonna get the first pick. I'm gonna get the second and third pick, and then we're just gonna go back and forth from 4 to 10. So we're gonna have 5 games each, and we'll see who picks the better games after that. So Tish, why don't you go first and give us your favorite game of the playoffs this year?
All right, with the first overall pick in the NBA 2026 playoff draft, I'm gonna take. To me, there's a clear 1 and 2. I'm gonna take. Even though it wasn't a finals game, I'm just gonna take OKC Spurs game 1, Western Conference Finals, where we saw the Wemby masterclass, double overtime, getting the job done. I think it's really hard to pass up on that. As good as the other option in my head was, which I'm sure you'll pick in one of your next two. So
Okay.
first overall pick is that.
All right. So you took game 1 of the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
Um, with my first pick, I'm gonna be in the same department as you. I think I'm gonna take game 7 of that same series actually. So I'm gonna take Spurs OKC game 7 Western Conference Finals. Obviously a great game from start to finish. In that at the beginning of the series we were potentially thinking, oh, we're in for a legendary series with game 1, and then games 2 through 6 pretty much were all blowouts. So we're like, okay, are we really gonna get a game 7? A great game 7, and we certainly did. Obviously every other player on the Spurs stepped up too. That was probably one of the better games we've seen from De'Aaron Fox. A guy like Champagnie, 20 points, Vassell, 11, Victor Wembanyama, 22, Fox 15, Steph Castle, 16. Great performance from SGA too, specifically in the second and third quarter. He played great as well, dropping 35 points and not too much of the flopping that we've seen from earlier in the series. So that made it great too. Just an overall fun game to watch. So I'm going to take OKC Spurs game 7 with my second pick, or first pick and the second overall in the draft. With my next pick, I think I'm gonna go take another Spurs game, and I'm gonna go back 1 round. So I'm gonna go to the Western Conference semifinals, Spurs and Wolves matching up, and I'm gonna take Wolves Spurs game 1. So this was the first game of that series, and the Wolves coming off of a really tough series against the Nuggets that went 6 games, versus the Spurs having an easier 5 game series that they were able to end at home. The Wolves, obviously the underdogs in the series, and no one expected them to be able to steal any of the first 2 games. Come in on the road, take the first game, a really close game that the Spurs had a chance to win at the end. I think it was Champagnie that gets the Champagnie or Vassell gets a shot at the very end that's potentially to win it. Wemby sets the playoff record with blocks. I think 12 blocks in that game. And just everyone in the Wolves wasn't afraid of him, at least for that game. They weren't afraid of him taking it to the rack. Really physical game, really fun game overall. So that's gonna be my second pick. Game 1 of Western Conference semifinals, Wolves and Spurs.
Yeah, great pick. I thought I can get that later in the draft. Hoping you maybe would have forgot about it, but I guess not. So, okay. So, two good picks there. I guess I'm going to take our first finals pick off of the board here. And I'm going to take game 4 of the NBA Finals, Spurs Knicks, where we saw the Spurs blow the historic 29-point lead. The Knicks had the biggest second half comeback of all time in NBA Finals. I think even playoff history, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely Finals history. So kind of just like, the sliver of hope that the Spurs had up 29 at MSG and then just losing all momentum from there on out. I'm going to take that game 4. Thrilling game we actually got to watch the ending of with capped off by the OG and Anobi Tippin. So great game there for my second pick.
Okay. So for my third pick, I'm gonna go back to the first round, and I'm gonna stick in the Western Conference. I guess we were just talking about before we did this draft, and there's a lot of great Western Conference games in the playoffs this year. Maybe not as much Eastern Conference, um, but I think I'm trying to think which game I thought was a little bit better. All right, I'm gonna take is from the Lakers and Rockets series. I'm gonna take Game Three. This game, obviously, we saw towards the end of that game, it looked like the Rockets had that one sealed, right? They're down two going into that game, and then they were able. It looked like they were gonna get the win. And then I think they were up six with only like 30 or like 20 seconds left, and then we see a great steal from LeBron. I think he was the one that pokes the ball out as they're trying to dribble it up the court from Reed Shepard. He gets the ball back, hits the clutch three. They're able to tie up the game, and they're allowed to able to go to overtime, and they're able to win it overtime. Great performance from LeBron. Drops 29 points, 13 boards, 6 assists. And somehow, even though he has a plus minus of 0 in the game, it was one of the highest out of all the starters. That's how bad the rest of the starters played during that game overall. But just a really fun game, and for a series that looked like it wasn't that competitive through the first two games, the Rockets had a great comeback. Yeah, great comeback in the series overall in that game. Just made that one close. Great final minute by the Lakers to win that one. So I'm gonna take Lakers Rockets game three.
How can do me like that, man? That was my next pick right there.
I could
It's
tell
like
based on your
uh,
reaction you were going for that one.
it's like Brett Favre going to the Vikings, man. Just like doing the other guy wrong. But okay, good pick there. So now you have three picks on the board. Let me think of
Yep.
my third pick here. Uh, I want I want my team to be like diverse. I don't want like a bunch of just like same skill set type of players on my team. I need some diversity. So I'm gonna get my first Eastern Conference pick out of here. I think actually the first Eastern Conference pick out of for all of us. So I'm gonna go back to the first round and take the Cavs, Raptors, game six it was, where we saw the RJ Barrett with like his Halliburton-esque shot buzzer beater to kind of get the win there, where the Cavs are up 3-2 with all the momentum. And it seemed like, they were just gonna wrap it up in six, move on, go face Pistons in the next round. But RJ Barrett had other plans. I remember as a Donovan Mitchell fan seeing that, kind of my heart sinking, scared about that game seven. But yeah, probably one of the few good Eastern Conference first round games, but in my opinion, the best one. So I'm gonna take Raptors Cavs game six there.
All right. I'm gonna go back into the first round again, and I'm gonna go over to the Eastern Conference this time. I'm gonna take a game that the final score doesn't look like it was that interesting of a game or that fun of a game to watch. But watching that game live and just sort of having it on in the background at first, and then realizing as it was going on, being like, "Oh man, this is gonna be a historic game right here." I'm gonna take Pistons Magic Game Six. So this was the game, just to remind everyone. This is the game. So the Pistons are up 3-2 in the series, right? They have a home game and they're able to win the series as the 8 seed. They're able to take down the 1 seed if they can win this game right here. And they put up 25 in the first and then 35 in the second quarter, right? So they got 60 at halftime. And they ended with 79 points. They scored 11 points in the third quarter and 8 points in the fourth quarter, right? They choke a 24-point lead, a 32 points drop from Cade Cunningham throughout the game for them to win that. Great comeback from the Pistons in the second half. I'm looking at the win probability thing right here. So towards the right when the third quarter is starting, and even towards like the late third quarter, the Pistons have a win probability of roughly 98%, or Magic have a win probability of roughly 98%. And then it only starts to flip towards the middle of the fourth quarter. So still like by the beginning of the fourth quarter, there's still roughly 80% to win. And the Pistons pull off an incredible comeback and they're able to win it at the end of that game. So I think I'm going to take that game six of the first round with my next pick.
Yeah, actually, I almost forgot about that series. So that was a good game. I remember seeing that one for not the conventional reasons, but okay. So it looks like you got your four picks. I'm going to take my fourth one here and kind of stick in the Eastern Conference and go to the Knicks and Hawks game two, where we saw the Hawks, even up the series at 1-1, and we saw CJ McCollum kind of take over, like reignite that narrative of like Atlanta having like New York's villain. First Trae Young, now CJ McCollum dropping 32 to win that game and kind of even things up and give some momentum going into home, where we saw they actually won that game three, led by another CJ McCollum solid performance. Not as good as his game two one. He dropped 32 in game two, but that was kind of fun just seeing like that villain arc take over where he's getting booed. He didn't really care. He's just like dropping buckets, hooping. And yeah, I'm going to take the Hawks Knicks game two. I mean, maybe the Hawks are the second best team in NBA looking at what happened, but yeah.
Yeah. Um, All right, so I'm looking at my big board now of draft picks. So I think we each have one pick left, right?
Who's your Mr. Irrelevant? Let's find out.
Okay. So I'm gonna take, ironically, even though ironically with us this pick being the Mr. Irrelevant pick, I'm gonna take a guy that probably going into the series he seemed like he was gonna be pretty irrelevant, but had an absolute explosion in this game and just had one of his greatest career games and one of the best games of the playoffs. So I'm gonna go back to the first round. I'm gonna go back all the way to game four of, in my opinion, the best series of the one of the best series of the first round, the Wolves Nuggets. So game four, this is when the Wolves are leading the series 2-1. They've had a couple injury issues, mainly Anthony Edwards was struggling with his runner's knees issue by then. And then going into that game, they were still up for 2-1 in the series. This is also coming after towards like the end of game two. Jaden McDaniels in his post game conference or post game like locker room conference, talking to some of the reporters, specifically calls out every single player by name on the Denver Nuggets, calls them all bad defenders, calls them all cones. And then what happens at the beginning of this game? Dante DiVincenzo goes down with his Achilles injury in the first quarter, and goes down with his another a knee injury, an injury to his other knee, and later in the second quarter. And it looks like all hope is lost for the Wolves in the series, in this game, and the series overall. And then what happens? A legendary performance from former Chicago Bull, but then turned Minnesota Timberwolves during the trade deadline this year. Ayo Dosunmu scores a career high 43 points. I don't think he actually broke more than that later in the playoffs. So a guy in SGA who scored his previous career, who scored a career high of 41 or 42 just that same day earlier in the day, Dosunmu was able to beat that and probably right now still has a higher career high in playoff points than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does with 43 in that game. Just played a great game overall. A lot of guys in the Wolves stepped up overall. Jaden McDaniels, Bones Highland too, Mike Conley, Naz Reid, all the guys in the Wolves, just were able to play a lot more roles than they were anticipated to going into that game and going into the series overall. And it ended off with a scuffle, a brouhaha, so to speak, towards the end of the game. Jaden McDaniels gets that last dunk at the end after the game was completely over and seals the win. And Nikola Jokic got a little bit frustrated with how bad he was playing and didn't know what else to do because he couldn't do anything on the basketball court. So he just turns to a little bit of rough play and starts to going after the Wolves there. Just love seeing that game, and I love the physicality that was overall in that game, and a great performance by Ayo Dosunmu. So very happy to see that. So that's gonna be my last pick.
Yeah, great pick there to close out your draft. That game was it was peak for all the non-basketball reasons, especially, just Jaden McDaniels aura farming, staking all his aura, backing it up, Lamine Yamal style. I mean, great game overall. Good pick by you. So how do I close out my draft? I mean, I could just take a finals game, but I can't go without picking my goat, man. Game two of the Lakers Rockets series. You took the better game of that series, in my opinion, game three, but I think game two is still pretty good, especially just looking at the narrative going into that game where we saw game one, the Lakers win, Kevin Durant was like ruled out, and so everyone was like, okay, the Rockets, they just lost because KD was out. They're going to win game two with KD back. And so he returns. But, lo and behold, the Rockets lose that game. KD drops a respectable 23 points, but LeBron backed by his 28, 8, and 7. And then also even a guy like Marcus Smart dropping 25, Luke Kennard dropping 23. This like seemingly like Walmart big three of like the Miami Heat back in the day. It's like now, like the Lakers big three of Marcus Smart, LeBron, and Luke Kennard. Who would have thought? But kind of just like the euphoria of emotions I was experiencing where, oh, Kevin Durant is back and they still got the win. Give me a bit of like delusion for the rest of the series, the rest of the playoffs. Obviously didn't really end well for the Lakers, but kind of just getting another vintage LeBron series and take the best remaining game from that series in game two. So I guess, yeah, that closed out our drafts there.
All right. Yeah, I think that was a solid draft. I think that just showed us that this playoffs was really fun. I think one of the best playoffs we've had in recent memory, obviously culminating in great finals. As much as the finals was a gentleman's sweep, I don't think anyone thought that the finals were boring. Any of the games were boring. All the games were really tightly contested. So that was great. So in terms of what we're going to be doing in the next couple episodes, obviously with no basketball on, coming up soon, we're going to be doing a lot of like player rankings, things like that, all-time talk, current talk, debates with like fans of like certain teams and things like that. So be on the lookout for things like that. Obviously, the World Cup going on right now. We plan to have a preview episode most recently, but with both of our hosts a little bit busy with graduation, got a little bit hard to do that. So we're going to see if we can get a World Cup episode out maybe towards the end of the group stage or things like that, and see if we can get some of our picks in and maybe get some guests for that too. And then yeah, we'll be into the summer, and then just a few more like just fun episodes and some games and stuff. And anything else you guys would like to see, put that in the comments. But that's all for today. So thanks for listening.